Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. I'm sure that many of you are fellow artists yourselves, and I think the really big highlight for Squarespace is being able to have a portfolio for all of your best work. And so for me, I have a various different series of illustrations that I like to kind of categorize together. In this case, I have a series where I did my monthly favorites for 2022 and 2023. And what is amazing is that you can actually edit the photos directly on Squarespace, which makes it so much more streamlined so that you can present your work in the most consistent and professional way as possible, which is important for me because I actually have to photograph my work as opposed to a digital artist, which you can just upload the file to. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first website or domain. Hello friends, I hope that you've been well. Today we are going to be continuing on my Zodiac portrait series. For those of you who don't know, I have started this series at the beginning of this year and I've been making my way through all of the signs, and this month we are going to be working on Leo. And my intention for this YouTube video was I was really going to focus in on all of my blending techniques for the different mediums that I use when I create these illustrations. But as it goes, I ended up having a really challenging time throughout the process of this illustration. So I'm going to share the intended blending techniques, but you'll also see that I have a lot of contradicting process points, which I think is just what always happens with many of my illustrations and is the exact reason why I don't make typical linear tutorials. So like the previous illustrations, I do my sketch digitally on my iPad, then print it onto copy paper, transfer it onto the watercolor paper, put it on the Masonite board, and start with watercolors. So here you can see I'm just using this little plastic bottle of plain tap water to reactivate paints that I had on this palette from before, swatching the colors just to see what they look like, adding in more paints as I need. And with watercolors, when you want to get really nice blends, is you want to typically do a wet on wet technique. That's usually going to create the easiest kind of soft gradients. So here I'm wetting the paper just with clean water with a wide paintbrush, and then I go in with the watercolors here and continuing to just kind of gauge how much water, how diluted I want it to be. With watercolors, you can't go lighter after you make your mark, at least with just watercolors. I do use acrylic gouache later. But so as you can see here, the paint sort of like with hot press paper, it doesn't move quite as much, but you'll see when I start adding in the other colors, they just sort of like bleed together more seamlessly than they would if we were working on a completely dry paper. I find that gradients are much easier on cold press paper, but all the same, it's definitely easier to create softer kind of blending and transitions between colors when the paper is wet, as well as having all of the colors pre-mixed and ready to go. That way you're not spending time mixing your colors in between and the paper getting dry as you're like mixing your colors. So with the background, I knew I wanted it to be a very, very warm color palette, since Leo, the colors associated with Leo is yellows, oranges, reds, and it is a fire sign as well. So I really wanted to visualize that with this very, very hot looking background. And so I have this sort of sunset in the back, but the kind of left side here on the bottom is actually a volcano that has erupted with lava sort of streaming down, because like I'd mentioned in my Aries illustration, I didn't want to depict the fire motif in a super literal sense in case of it looking like a Guy Fieri type flame situation. So that's why I decided to go with lava and a volcano instead. And then as the background is drying, I'm going in with another wash of watercolor here on the hair. So similar technique, I have all the colors kind of mixed there, and then I wet the entire paper and then go in with a bunch of different colors. I wanted her hair to be like a very, very light blonde. So I like kind of more ashy blonde typically. So that's why for the base of the hair, I went with like blues, purples, and pinks as opposed to anything in like the yellow family. And then because this piece is going to have so much orange in it, I wanted it to feel balanced in a way or have some contrast with having some blue shadows, since blue is the opposite end of the color wheel to orange. They're complementary colors. And so I decided to take a risk here and use the blue for the shadows first, and then I start adding in the skin tone afterwards, after that layer has dried. Here I'm doing another blending technique with watercolors. So you can see here, first I'm going in with the darkest shade on the background there, then cleaning off my paintbrush and then going in with that red color right next to it, and then cleaning off my paintbrush again, and then just using the clean wet paintbrush to blend out the very edges. And this is another technique that I use with blending watercolors if I'm not necessarily doing like the entire sheet has been covered with water. And I find in doing that, you have a little bit more control. And the key about getting those really, really punchy saturated colors is making sure that you're cleaning your paintbrush in between each color. So here I'm now going over the skin tone here with reds and yellows. So you can see again, I placed down that red color first on the kind of bust area there, and then clean off the paintbrush and then go in with the yellow tone right next to it while the paint is still dry. And you can see that they sort of just seamlessly kind of blend together while still maintaining a sense of separation so that you can see the transition between the two colors. And the beauty of letting that blue layer dry first is that even though I'm using all of these washes of yellows and reds on top of it, you can see the blue doesn't move at all because I let that layer dry. Then this is where disaster struck. I was feeling really confident up until this point, but then adding in that kind of third layer of color here on the skin, it started to really look very muddy. I think because I was just not being as intentional with the colors. So this is where I thought, okay, maybe we just need to go switch over to the acrylic gouache. So here I'm picking out all of my colors that I think I'm gonna need for this portion of the illustration. And I was feeling like this skin tone was looking like too patchy, really uneven. So I decided to go ahead and just do entire wash of the red on top. But the thing with watercolors is they dry a lot lighter than they are when they're dark. So that is something always to keep in mind when you're painting with watercolors. So going in with the gouache here, again, another blending technique that I implement is having all of your colors ready to go on the palette. So here I'm going in with like kind of the base skin tone, I guess you could say, and then going in with a lighter tone. And again, always adjusting the amount of water I need, just kind of based on intuition, starting out with like fairly kind of lighter washes. And then while that mid-tone base paint color is still wet, I go in with the lighter tone right on top of it. And then similar to watercolors, I'm going to end up cleaning off the paintbrush and then using it to blend the colors together. And this is something that I often edit out of like me cleaning my paintbrush like off camera, because it's just like you can't see it and it's not really fun to watch. But that's how I maintain like the vibrancy of the colors, is like constantly washing the paintbrush in between all the different color switches and like using the clean paintbrush to blend the colors together. And you can see that I'm moving from like section to section with this because again, when you're working with the paints while they're still a little bit damp, a little bit wet, they blend seamlessly together a lot easier than if I were to work on the face and the chest at the same time. So I work in kind of like chunks so that I can utilize the paint being a little bit wet to blend the colors together. So now we're moving on to the face here and just implementing those same techniques, going in with the kind of base tone and then that strong magenta kind of as the shadow, and then the lighter kind of yellowy tones for the highlights of the face, and just kind of slowly mapping out the different planes and shapes of her face. And as you can see, the acrylic gouache completely covers up all of the watercolor base that we had put down before, and you might be wondering what was the point. And to you I say, there was no point. Honestly, like, this is the reality of the way that a lot of the times my illustrations go, is I put in all of this work, but then realize it's just not working, and then I have to redo it or fix it or something. So that's just like why I really struggle with the idea of doing a typical tutorial, because if I were to say step 1, step 2, step 3, like, it just wouldn't make sense to you because there is no linear path. But anyway, after doing another pass of watercolors on the background, I go ahead and try to add in the blue again for the shadows, because again, I really wanted to balance the amount of like really warm tones in this illustration with some cool tones for the shadows. So I use very watered down acrylic gouache to essentially do like glazes over these parts so that we're still seeing the kind of varied values and the blue sort of mixing in with that magenta underneath, and it creates like a more muted kind of purpley tone. That way it doesn't feel like super strongly blue. And I find that doing glazes as well, it blends a little easier into what you had done before. But it was at this point, after I'd put in the darks of the eyes and the eyebrows, I realized that the skin tone was just like way lighter than I had wanted it to be. So again, going over the entire thing with another wash of color, because I was just so frustrated with how it was turning out, and it just wasn't quite what I was hoping for. So after letting that dry, I decided, let's try using some colored pencils and see if I can get the desired look that I want. So starting out again, very determined to have this like blue tone for the shadows, I go back and forth between the blue for the kind of deepest parts of the shadow areas and a magenta and a purple to meld them together into the base skin tone. And when it comes to blending with colored pencils, my key piece of advice is to make sure that your pencils are very sharp, keep them sharpened, and also start out really light. Don't use like a really heavy hand, because you don't want to compress the paper fibers and then you won't be able to like continue to layer. With my entire process, whether it be colored pencils, watercolors, gouache, I am a big advocate for layering and doing very thin, light layers and slowly build up your values. So that definitely goes for the colored pencils as well. And another thing is, you'll never make colored pencils extremely smooth. Like, they're always going to have a little bit of texture, but to minimize intense amounts of texture, I recommend keeping your pencils sharp, but also going in multiple different directions with your hatching so that they kind of overlap with each other. Then from here, I start going in with the acrylic gouache again to bring out those highlights even more. And the thing about using the color pencils underneath is it helps me very slowly build up and map out where I want the highlights and shadows to be. And then using the acrylic gouache on top in like very diluted forms, I can just sort of like meld all the colors together and kind of soften the textures. And here you can see I put the paint down, clean the paintbrush off, and then just using the wet paintbrush, I'm just sort of like softening the edges and kind of dragging the paint around so that it just like melts into the base and like what is underneath. And sometimes that's not quite enough, so I do end up going in back and forth with the kind of base color and then going around the edges of the highlighted areas to just better transition the different values. Another thing I was struggling with was the emotion that I wanted to convey with her. So here you can see I'm actually fixing her eyebrows because I felt like I wanted her expression to be a lot more fierce looking, which I originally had in the sketch but lost from the copious amounts of layers of paint. So I tried to make her eyebrows slanting down a little bit more because I find that expression kind of reads a little bit more intimidating, I guess. Her expression is still quite soft and ethereal in the end, but I think adjusting the eyebrows just a little bit helped to a degree, because I find with Leos, I feel like they're most associated with being, you know, they have like leadership qualities, they are very bold and dramatic. So I really wanted to convey that with this illustration, but I was frustrated that the expression turned out so soft. So I was like, okay, let's move on to the hair while I sort of, you know, tinker around in my brain how I'm going to convey that. And the hair, I knew I wanted it to be big and dramatic and, you know, kind of mimic a lion's mane. So I wanted it to be very, very curly, and I wanted it to be like a light blonde. After letting the hair dry, I decided, oh, I can actually create that sense of boldness with giving her more dramatic makeup. So I decided to go in with a dark lipstick color, which was not the initial plan. And then I also gave her like some darker eyeshadow as well, which I do think really helped in giving her that flair of drama, and also it'll contrast really nicely, I think, with the lighter hair color. At least that was my intention. And I also find that with these illustrations, I like to start mapping in a little bit of that black background, because I find that helps me get a better gauge of my values. And this hair, you guys, was such a struggle. I was so distraught about how it was turning out. I think it was a combination of me not having painted this hair texture very often, but also just being so exasperated with this entire process altogether. But what I ended up doing was I stopped filming and just sort of tinkered around with layering different colors on top of each other.
A few moments later,
which essentially led to this, which I ended up using, I think, a lots of pastel purples and blues to make the hair a lot more soft and almost cloud-like. And then I decided to go in with a very, very light cream color to bring out the curls, but mainly just focus them around the face, so that we were highlighting and framing her face, but not necessarily needing to define every single curl throughout the entire head of hair. And while I went into this illustration with the intention that her hair was going to be blonde, I didn't necessarily intend it for it to be quite this ashy. Like, I would say that this reads almost gray in the end. But I think what ended up happening was because of the shadows that I had on her skin reading so like purpley blue, it felt necessary to carry that kind of color story onto her hair as well. Another tip for getting really nice blended colors, again, is to layer. So you can see here that I'm going over the background again with more washes of watercolor, and you can see that the saturation is looking a lot punchier and the colors are just more well blended and not looking quite as patchy. And I also just find it very therapeutic to paint these like big washes of watercolor. And then for the final kind of fun touches, I did lots of speckles of gold paint. I have a few different shades of gold here that I used. So I have like a kind of a classic medium gold, and then I also have a kind of champagne gold that I'm using for the freckles here. It's like a very, very light gold. And I thought that was just like a fun little touch, as if she's like sun-kissed in a way, because with Leo, they are most associated with the sun as the symbol, and the flower associated with Leo is sunflowers, which I initially intended to use in this illustration, but I realized that sunflowers, they read as very sweet. Like they just seem so wholesome and cute. And to me, that's not how I see Leos. I see Leos as really confident and expressive. So I ended up going with this more like sun goddess theme instead, because I felt that was more fitting for a Leo who, you know, likes to be the center of attention. You know, the sun, you know, everything revolves around the sun. It kind of makes more sense to me for a Leo. And as for the process point here, we're basically just sort of finishing up any little final touches. So I'm going in with the darkest darks for the eyeliner and the line art of the illustration and kind of finessing the eyes. And as always, this is the Patreon artwork for the month of August. So you have until August 31st to sign up to my Patreon page, which I'll have linked in the description, and you will receive this artwork as a postcard and sticker design. And the prices include worldwide shipping, and on top of that, you also get access to my Patreon exclusive feed, where I have over 2 years worth of exclusive YouTube videos. I have a podcast. I post a lot of the behind the scenes stuff of all of my illustrations as well, such as sketches. I create mood boards and provide inspo and reference photos for my illustrations as well. And yeah, just a lot of extra goodies over there. So if you'd like to support me, I'll have the link in the description to my Patreon down below. Otherwise, I also have an online shop that you can purchase prints from me as well. So no pressure at all. Even just interacting with this video is plenty of support. And I really appreciate you being here and continuing to consume my content. And while it felt like I was in the trenches while working on this illustration, I hope that it was enjoyable for you to watch and that the blending techniques that I shared in this video were helpful for you. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!